Hi everyone, John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn video on Lord of the Flies context. It's a bit of a feisty one today. So we're going to have a look at some of the key contextual factors which were driving Golding to write this text. Then we will have a look at the context in action, so how that filters into the text itself, and then we'll round off nicely by looking at 3 of the best contextual quotes for your essays and for the exam. Okay then, so let's dive in first then. So the key context then, if we just get a grip on that. Okay, so first off then, just to say, this was written in post-war Britain. Okay, so World War II is over, and it's a pretty grim time. So the aftermath of World War II then, there was deep anxiety about human nature and civilization breaking down. We just had the worst conflict in human history. 60 million plus people were now dead, and so we were really reflecting on the nature of humanity, and it was almost like, can we get our way back to what things were like before? Then building on that, William Golding had experience in World War II, so he served in the war, and he wrote the novel as a kind of warning about mankind's potential for violence and savagery. In the novel, he kind of argues that there's a Latin phrase that you might want to research called animus dominandi. And he kind of argues that we all have this kind of this desire to destroy and to kind of to run amok, basically, this animus dominandi within us, and that's what he kind of explores throughout the whole text. Now, moving forward in terms of context, in terms of children and education, so. Again, quite an interesting thread to explore and to do some independent research on. So within this period then, the British Empire was still very much a thing, just about. And so it was all about training an elite. British boys, i.e. kind of like the characters within Lord of the Flies, were seen as future leaders, and they were shaped by elite schools and by the British Empire values. Okay, and it was about kind of civilizing the rest of the world in theory. However, in terms of context, there are educational flaws. So the island, when they're taken away from these elite schools and all the rules that are surrounding them, the island becomes a testbed for what happens when that social structure collapses. And it exposes the flaws beneath education and civilization, because all the educational rules and values which they've been given, they just fade away into nothingness when they're on the island. So it seems to be suggesting, Golding seems to be saying that these educational values that we were putting such store on and building the British Empire around, they don't actually have much value, and they disintegrate when you put them under pressure. Okay, so moving forward into Golding's views then. So obviously William Golding is the writer. So what does he believe about the kind of context and things like that? So I believe that he's very pessimistic about human nature. He believes that beneath civilization, and a very thin layer of civilization, humans have an innate capacity for savagery and violence, what we called earlier the animus dominandi. We have this innate thing within us that can make us inherently violent. So he's very pessimistic about human nature. I'm not sure I totally agree with him on that one, to be honest. I'm a bit more optimistic. But nevertheless, that's what Golding's conception of human nature is all about. And I think also he's quite interested in exploring the fragility of civilization. We like to believe that civilization will last forever and it's all really, really strong. But Golding kind of seems to suggest, well, not really. If we put society under enough pressure, it would snap and it would break and fall apart. So he argues that social order is extremely thin, very fragile, and it will break down once authority is gone and the rules are gone. Then we relapse back into kind of almost like social animals in some ways. Okay, so how does this context then play out in action? Well, let's have a look then. You can see the image there first off. The kids on the island getting very very testy and starting to become break down the rules of society. Now, first off then, let's have a look. So civilization versus savagery in the book. So the boys' gradual descent into violence on the island illustrates Golding's belief that human nature, as we learned, is very fragile and it easily slips into savagery without those social rules. The animus dominandi is very much alive within us all, and it's very powerful. So once we take the rules away, then it comes out, and that's where, you know, kind of hideous things can happen, and they really do on the island when you read the text. Then, moving forward, then we have the post-war anxiety and loss of innocence. So the boys lost childhood because obviously they crash on the island as kind of kids, and so they lose that childhood, and there's a breakdown of order. And it reflects, if you know your history, it reflects the wider post-World War II fears about humanity's capacity for destruction and the end of innocence. So it's quite interesting how Golding's kind of anxieties at the time in the early Cold War reflect and play out on the island, and they reflect the anxieties of the kids on the island. So that's a really good one for you to tease out in any essays. Then, as we know, we have the British education and class system. So the boys' background from elite private schools shows the contrast between the learned social order of their school life and the primal, almost animalistic instincts that emerge when isolated from civilization. And I think that's because Golding was a schoolmaster, so it's very important to know that. So he kind of knew how the system worked. And I think he's kind of jabbing at the school system in Britain at that time and kind of saying, yeah, we're giving them all these kind of great values, but look what happens when I take the rules away. They don't really mean anything. They just vanish into thin air and they turn back into almost social animals. So I think he takes quite a dim view of the British education and the class system, because it doesn't really save the kids once they're away from their teachers on the island. Okay. Now, if we have a good look now at some contextual quotes. Okay, so let's just frame this up nicely. Okay, so first off, we have Simon. And he says a really interesting quote. He says, evil within, humanity as the real beast is the heading. And then the quote, that comes from that is, maybe there is a beast. Maybe it's only us. So that really haunting line from Simon reflects Golding's belief that the real source of evil lies within humanity itself. So that on animus dominandi I keep kind of rattling on about. So it's written after World War II, as we know, and it captures those post-war fears that civilization as a concept is merely masking mankind's innate savagery. We're all potential kind of violent individuals, but we just wear this mask of civilization over our faces to kind of cover that. It's a very, very profound, almost philosophical point that he's making there in that quote, and Golding is making behind Simon. But that's a really interesting philosophical issue to kind of grapple with in any essays. Then moving on, we have good old Ralph. Okay, so Ralph's quite a good character in this kind of piece, and he says, the rules, you're breaking the rules. Really powerful, really important quote, and the exclamatory sentence, the exclamation mark there, really adds to the drama. So this line shows the boys' early attachment to order and structure, and it therefore echoes the values of British society and the school system and its emphasis on discipline, because it was extremely disciplined at that time. But as the island descends into chaos, Golding warns how fragile those systems really are. And Ralph can't stop the rules from being broken. He doesn't have the power. Okay, he doesn't have the coercive strength to get everybody back in line. And so the whole thing on the island just descends into chaos. Okay. All right, and then lastly, from the narrator, or Golding himself. A really powerful quote, and actually quite sad and tragic in some ways. Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart. A really powerful quote there. So this emotional ending reflects Golding's core didactic message within this text, that beneath the surface of civilization, which we all love and cherish, lies a brutal, destructive instinct within us all. It's quite an unsettling idea, actually. And it mirrors, as we know, that post-war disillusionment of the 1950s, because World War II had ended in 1945, but we were starting a new war. We had the Cold War that was starting to kick off, and that didn't end until 1991. So we were really worried about, we've just kind of killed 60 million people. Are we going to do it all over again, but with nuclear weapons, which would have ended all life on Earth? So they were very, very scared and anxious about that. And it reveals Golding's pessimistic view of human nature, as we know, which was shaped by his own experiences in World War II. So obviously being fighting in World War II, it would have given him that pessimistic view of mankind as a violent kind of species. Okay. So then, if we just do a nice little overview of that. So in terms of context then, we've looked at some of the key contextual factors, post-war Britain and the weakness of the British education system in that period, then teased it out and looked at some of the key context in action. So obviously the clash between civilization and savagery, that animus dominandi within all of these kids on the island. And then we've teased out as well some of the key contextual quotes, which would be very good to maybe sit back after this lesson and kind of reflect on and see and try and tease out what Golding's points actually really were and why he wrote the novel in the first place. Okay, so obviously if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon. It's always appreciated by us, just to kind of grow the channel even further. Keep watching, looking out for more videos. We'll be releasing more every week, of course. And it just remains to say, obviously, thanks for listening and take care.